Well, for more on the upcoming historic meeting between Xi and Trump and the investment relations between Washington and Beijing, I'm joined by Henry To, live from Dallas. He's Chief Investment Officer and Head of Research for CB Capital Partners. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you, Rachelle. Great to be here.
So help us understand, why do we see such a disparity between local and federal governments when it comes to attracting Chinese investment?
I think when you look at the federal government, what they're concerned about right now is headline risk, right? Because as President Trump was voted on a platform that aims to curb the trade deficit and also to address national security issues. So they're concerned about things like intellectual property transfer and anything that would create headline risk. If a Chinese company buys a U.S. company and they lay off a significant number of people, then they'll be concerned. On the local level, though, when you look at the states and the various localities, they're mostly concerned about job creation, attracting money from China and create jobs here locally. And Texas is, as you mentioned, is a major part of that. As long as they come and create jobs, then we welcome all the capital that will come from China.
Now let's also look at CFIUS. How should Chinese investors better cope with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States and its expansion?
I think the vast majority of Chinese investors don't really need to worry about that, because historically the vast majority of deals have been approved by CFIUS. But I would recommend keeping under the radar screen. For example, do smaller transactions. Just last week, a $100 million transaction in the financial services industry was approved, and anything anything to do with technology transfer or infrastructure related, because we have a $1 trillion infrastructure package coming up, those will be much more scrutinized. So I would recommend not doing that right now.
So being that we could see more scrutiny in those sectors that you mentioned, technology and infrastructure, what about the trends in Chinese investment then? Which sectors do they tend to gravitate to, and how do you see that potentially changing going forward?
When you look at the trend in Chinese investments into the U.S., last year it tripled to about $50 billion. And I think going forward, I think when you look at what Chinese companies are interested in, obviously technology, obviously they want a piece of the infrastructure spending package. Now, but when it comes to any technology transfer, I think that's off the table right now. So I think anything that would translate maybe intellectual property or maybe human capital, right? So if China wants to develop its own financial industry and try to develop an asset management industry that's competitive on a global basis, they may want to look at the financial sector where the CFIUS is more welcoming in terms of FDI from China.
So let's say we potentially could see more demand coming then from inside China. What role do you think increased capital controls from China could have on where Chinese investors choose to put their money?
I think Chinese investors right now, given that it's very hard for them to diversify, although I think capital controls is going to get worse this year. I think capital controls are going to be, it's just very hard to take money out from China, and it's going to get more scrutinized as the yuan fluctuates at the current level. And I think going into the meeting on Thursday and Friday, the Chinese has been really propping up the yuan, and I think that will continue for the rest of the year. So, but at some point going forward, I think once capital is more liberalized, I think certainly Chinese investors themselves would want to diversify on a global basis, not just in the U.S., but around the world as well.
Now, we know everyone's going to be watching this Xi-Trump meeting that's coming up this week. What's your outlook for negotiations on the China-U.S. bilateral investment treaty?
I think it's a big political risk for President Trump, because unless he gets huge concessions in terms of the trade deficit and maybe forcing China, so to speak, to open up certain number of sectors on their side to invite U.S. investments into China, especially the financial sector and the agricultural sector, it's going to be very hard politically for President Trump to do that this time. And even if he's able to successfully negotiate some kind of bilateral agreement, it takes 2/3 of the Senate to ratify the agreement. So based on what happened with the healthcare legislation, when it didn't even go past the House, I think that would be a very politically difficult thing for President Trump to do. Although I think President Xi would love to get it done, because he wants the U.S. to invest into the One Belt One Road scheme, and also to invite U.S. capital to go to China as well.
Certainly a delicate balance. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Henry To, Chief Investment Officer and Head of Research for CB Capital Partners.